Welcome back. You're watching Your World at 10. Well, the trillion-dollar question, are you ready for Grexit? That's the new term in vogue that says Greek exit in short. Well, the question everybody's asking is whether it will be an orderly Grexit or a chaotic, disorderly Grexit. How do you tell the difference between the two? What will be, let's say, the situations or conditions leading to any one of these scenarios, and what could be the likely repercussions of any one of these, both of these scenarios? Well, for answers, I'm joined today by Moorad Chaudhury, Treasurer at RBS Corporate Banking. Moorad, thank you so much for your time. Tell me, how does one distinguish between what will make an orderly Greek exit from the euro, if it were to happen, or a disorderly one? I mean, we've been in disorder for 2 years now.
Yes, you are right, and it would be difficult to distinguish between the two, although the disorder, as you've described, that we've seen in the last 2 years is nothing compared to what we would see if there was an exit from the euro. I think what the policymakers are suggesting is if we plan it in advance and we telegraph it and we put everything in place, firewalls, increased bank capital, guarantees, etc., then once it comes to pass, the impact should be less severe than if they just announced it was going to happen next week, for example. Personally, I think that all sounds good on paper, but you know, in practice it's going to be very difficult to distinguish between a disorderly or an orderly and an orderly. It's just going to be disorderly. It's going to be quite significant. The impact will be very severe, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that there's any easy way to do this or any less painful way to do this. It's going to be very, very severe for everyone concerned.
All right, many people agree with what you're saying, Moorad, that it will be Europe's Lehman-like moment of freezing up across the financial sector potentially, and then there are those that say that many European banks have, over the course of the last year, in anticipation of a potential such situation, written down a bulk of their Greek sovereign debt holdings or exposure to Greece. They've paired those situations and now seem to be more in control if there were to be a Greece exit. So why do you still believe that it's going to be chaotic and disorderly no matter how well it was planned?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure I'd use the word chaotic, but it will be severe. I mean, you mentioned Lehman. I mean, the impact there made it clear that one doesn't need to have a direct exposure to Greece, or, you know, for example, hold Greek debt or have exposure to Greek banks to suffer from the fallout. Just as in 2008, banks didn't need to have direct exposure to Lehman debt or be counterparties of Lehman to suffer in the wake of the interbank crisis that resulted afterwards. You know, the fact is here, you are right, banks have put in place much more robust liquidity and funding arrangements compared to what was the case in 2008, but that doesn't mean that once you get any sort of freeze in the interbank market because of the contagion impact, the knock-on effect of the loss of confidence throughout the banking market, it doesn't mean that banks won't suffer. Nevertheless, they will find that there's a lot more uncertainty, there's a lot more nervousness, and there's a lot more closing up of credit lines and funding lines. This is going to impact the entire economy and a lot of the banking market. So we shouldn't think that just because you don't have, one doesn't have a direct exposure, one would be affected. One would. So, you know, it would be a severe impact, and it would result in deep depression in Greece itself to start with. We shouldn't think that there's just some painless gain to be had from devaluation, that they would be in the doldrums for some time. And equally, in the rest of the EU and in the banking sector, we'll see a lot of nervousness, a lot of drawing in of credit lines, and so that will impact funding generally. So it's difficult to see how there can be any orderly exit. You know, you'll find that there's a not so much a capital type crash, but there's a funding freeze, and this will have a knock-on impact on the rest of the economy. You know, it's quite a serious issue. You know, whatever cost we think we have in trying to bail out the Greek economy, you know, so the loss to the Northern European taxpayer as a result of bailing out sovereign debt will be magnified considerably if we let an exit occur, and then the economy as a whole freezes up, and then we're in depression for some time to come.
All right, so my next question is two-pronged. What can banks do to mitigate this to some extent, of course not fully, but to some extent, considering that this is the one of two options facing us through the course of this year? And to go back to your first response, where you said the features, you know, to identify an orderly exit would be the putting in place of firewalls, you know, increasing bank capital, and thereby shoring up their ability to deal with something like this. Where is the money going to come from for that increase in bank capital?
Well, that's not something one does overnight. The first thing that all banks are doing and have been doing, and this is in response to the the crash in 2008. It's not EU related. It's a general response of banks worldwide to firm up their funding arrangements, in the wake of the crash of 2008 and in anticipation of the implementation of Basel III. So the first thing is to get in, as you said just now, more firm funding arrangements, long-term funding, more secure funding, more diversified funding, more stable funding in place. And banks are doing that. As I said earlier, the funding situation for the banking market globally is much better than it was in 2008. But there is only so much one can do. At the end of the day, confidence is an ephemeral thing. It's out there in the space, in the economic space, and it impacts everybody. It impacts business. It impacts capital investment decisions. No matter how much of a firewall one puts in place, the ECB may backstop banks, for example. That's one potential solution. You could have guarantees coming from governments to banks generally in their jurisdiction. You can put all this in place, but what happens when you get negative sentiment arising because of this exit? You get economic activity contracting as a result. You get banks doing less business. You get corporates doing less business. You get economic output contracting. What happens then? Despite the fact that you have the firewall, you have funding arrangements in place, you just get lower economic activity. Then what do we do? I don't think there is any mitigant there, because it's a confidence thing, just like the economy is as a whole. Corporates invest for the future. They create jobs. They invest capital when they have a plan for the future and they are optimistic about the future. Otherwise, they hold back. They rebuild balance sheets. They maintain cash piles to cover for a rainy day. If this carries on, the EU is going to struggle to come out of the recessionary state it's in at the moment.
All right, to go back to the first part of your response, and I agree that European banks have been, for a variety of reasons, the financial crisis of 2008, Basel III Accord, shoring up capital. Do you believe they're in a fairly comfortable position today? Because my mind goes back to the UniCredit incident from last year, where one of Italy's leading banks was trying to raise more money and had a fairly tough time being able to do that. So do you think that banks have been able to resolve that capital situation to a certain good degree and thereby are better prepared to face the eventuality of a Greece exit?
If you're asking me, is the banking market as a whole, at the macro level, better placed to withstand impacts of a falling market, negative sentiment, than they were in 2008? The answer, I would say, would be yes, and the answer has to be yes. But no crisis is the same. The next crisis is always different to the last crisis. The next market correction always has a different causal factor than the last market correction. It would be foolish to suggest that, okay, we've done a lot, we've put in all kinds of mitigants, we've learnt our lessons, therefore we're safe. No one should think that. We should just bear in mind that fallout from the euro, a euro exit, and I'm not going to use that inelegant term you referred to earlier, where the market is called a Greek exit. I'm not a fan of it. We shouldn't think that this will be withstandable, and somehow, not a big disaster because we've put in all these mitigants in place. The best laid plans will always come awry at the minute you come into contact, with some uncertainty, some unknown.
Murad, I get that. Sorry to interrupt you. No, I get that. But how would you rate the preparedness or the capital adequacy, if I was to use a technical term, of the European banking system, as a whole, in a sense, today, in order to be able to meet a situation of a euro exit? Let me not call it a Grexit either.
Well, it's not at the individual bank level. Is it a capital issue if you don't have direct exposure to Greece or Greek banks? No, it's a confidence issue. Okay. It's a contagion. It's a knock-on issue. It's a liquidity issue. So the capital position at the macro level is stronger. Banks have been rebuilding their balance sheets from 2008. But does that mean you can ride out the storm of a Greek exit from the euro? I don't see how it's possible. The knock-on effect in confidence impacts all your customers. They do less business. You generate less revenue. You're in a more uncertain economic space. All these things are not necessarily connected with your tier 1 capital ratio. So it's not just a narrow issue of capital and liquidity and everything will be okay. It's much more of a confidence issue and the contraction in economic output that results from negative confidence, from falling confidence.
All right, if you look at all the reports issued by banks, research houses, broking houses over the last couple of weeks, they've all upped their chances or the possibility of a euro exit or a Greece exit to 50, some say 70%. Really, what do you think? Is it going to be the more likely outcome at the end of this year?
it's a tough call. I still hold personally, if you want my personal opinion, I still hold that they will pull the chestnuts out of the fire and somehow think of a way to retain Greece within the euro. You are right, the probability of exit from the euro has increased. Political leaders themselves are speaking in terms where they are beginning to accept that it's a possibility, and so therefore may happen. So obviously the probability of this occurrence has increased, is higher. I still think personally that it won't happen. They'll think of something. It could be that we get a more positive result in the Greek election in June, such that a government can be formed that sticks to the austerity plan and the bailout terms. But you know, it's a tough call. I think the real big danger is that the EU is in danger of is at risk of talking itself into an exit. You know, it begins to think, okay, it's all right, we can handle it, it won't be as bad as all that, let's just prepare for it. And at which point it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's something that we should be mindful of. I still think it would be much more painful than people are suggesting, and you know, at the 11th hour they may well come up with some solution. It's a personal opinion though.
All right, let's hope that does happen. Moorad Chaudhury, I appreciate you joining us and taking us through what you think some of the conditions and city